Let me start by thanking Roger Smith, the director of the Democracy, Citizenship and Constitutionalism program here at Penn, for helping us organize this series of events that has to do with post-neoliberal Latin America. I also would like to thank Turia Faletti and the planning committee for helping us put together a very interesting and diverse series of speakers for this session. As you all probably know, Latin America has been experiencing significant changes regarding their social organization, political order, and economic development. The old ideas associated with the Washington Consensus are being replaced by an agenda that puts a lot more emphasis on social issues, distributive justice, issues of equality, and so forth. It's still an open question about where the region is going, and a big motivation behind this series is actually to discuss the different aspects of these changes from different perspectives. One particular aspect of this change has to do with inequality. As you know, there's increasing concern in the world about the growing inequality and economic inequality across the world. It appears that every country, inequality is increasing dramatically. In this context, every once in a while, you hear that Latin America presents a different model. You hear that Latin America inequality is declining, different economic policies, declining Gini coefficient, and it appears to present a different model of economic development. The main motivation for the talk today is actually to understand some of these changes, what they mean, and to put them in context. We think that to really understand inequality and these changes in Latin America, we have to think more broadly and not just document the issue of inequality, but also think more importantly about whether this represents a different political economy, different broad economic conditions in terms of both policies and economy. And the talks today actually discuss the issue of the political economy of post-neoliberal Latin America. We're very fortunate to have three presenters, two papers and one discussant, and the very established researchers that have been investigating this issue for a long time, and are very accomplished researchers. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the speakers today. I'm going to start with Maristela Svampa. Maristela holds a philosophy degree from the Universidad Nacional de Córdoba in Argentina, and has a PhD in sociology from the School of Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences in France. She's currently a senior investigator at the National Council for Scientific Research in Argentina and professor at the National University of La Plata. She has received much recognition, including a Guggenheim Fellowship and a Konex Award in Sociology. She has published many books investigating equality and life experiences, specifically in Argentina, including a book on the winners, life in country clubs and gated communities, between the road and the neighborhood, the experiences of the piqueteros organizations, and the exclusionary society, Argentina under the neoliberal regime, among others. Unfortunately, Maristela was going to come here to make the presentation, but for different reasons she couldn't join us today, so she's going to be joining us through Skype, and we're hoping that the technology is going to help us too. Our second paper is by Claudini Pereira. Claudini is a clinical associate professor of economics in the WP Carey School of Business at Arizona State University. He is originally from Brazil and has long investigated issues of inequality in Latin America. He received his PhD in economics from North Carolina State University and was a faculty member at Tulane University. He has been a regular consultant and advisor to economic organizations and groups, including the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank, and many more. He's currently a member of an interesting group, the Commitment to Equity organization, and he might talk a little bit about what the organization is doing, which is sort of like a think tank designed to analyze the impact of taxation and social spending on inequality and poverty across the world. The project in this committee is directed by Nora Lustig from Tulane University, and he is going to present a summary of their results for Latin America. Finally, we're very fortunate to have as discussant Maria Victoria Murillo. Vicky is a professor in the Department of Political Science and the School of International Public Affairs at Columbia University. She studied at the University of Buenos Aires, where we overlapped for a while, and received her PhD in Political Science from Harvard University. She's also the author of a long list of articles and books on political and economic issues in Latin America, including labor unions, partisan coalitions, and market reforms in Latin America, and political competition, partisanship, and policy making in the reform of Latin American public utilities. She has also published extensively in leading political science journals, and she has very gracefully agreed to discuss the papers that we're presenting and to give us a broader view of the political conditions in the region. So, without further ado, Maristel is going to present.
Yes, no worries, Okay, thanks for the invitation, especially Maria Victoria and the DCC. It's a really great opportunity for us to share some of the results on inequality and poverty in Latin America, something that we've been working on as a group the last 5 years. So it was before inequality became as something to talk about in the center stage, especially in the U.S. And also thanks Matt for all the support. It was great. I'm Claudia Pereira. I was at Tulane when I met Nora Lustig. She's the director for the Commitment to Equity group, and he'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I'm an economist, and so don't take that personally. And also I'm Brazilian, so I'm surrounded by Argentinians here. So I guess this is a good place to be, behind Claudia for a while. So my presentation, I try to get short one, self-contained, and of course, as an economist, I cannot forget that. There will be a few things that it will be important to understand the results and why this work is getting the attention that it's receiving in the last couple of years. So today I'm presenting just a summary for 6 countries: Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Mexico, Peru, Uruguay. The Argentina team is Carlos Casino and Nora, and Bolivia, Veronica Paz-Araujo, George Gray Molina, currently the chief economist for the UNDP for Latin America. Wilson Jimenez and Aston Brazil, Sean Hicks, he's our PhD student. I shouldn't say our, because I'm no longer at Tulane, but he's a PhD student at Tulane, and John Scott from Mexico, Miguel Ramiro from Peru, and Marisa Nora Maximo and Florence from Uruguay. We already have results for 10 countries in Latin America and 7 are in progress. So what you should expect today, briefly, just to give you as heads up what's ahead, I will give you a brief introduction about what we are trying to estimate through the incidence analysis, and talk a little bit about the data. This is important to us to remind people that data should be comparable, and why it took us by surprise the first time we present these results, that even the multilateral organization do not have something even close to what we actually accomplished with this work. The main results and conclusions and some further work that we are currently trying to get done. So basically, incidence analysis is asking a few questions about what is the role of government on inequality and poverty. So in particular, is what is the impact of taxes and transfers. And in Latin America, for many years, it's been a very unequal region. Brazil, my home country, for many years was the second most unequal country in the world. And in the last 20 years, we experienced a decline in inequality, which is the opposite that you experience in most developed countries. So does fiscal policy play an important role in explaining the decline in equality and poverty in Latin America? If so, how? Can we actually call Latin American just one entity that could be as a prototype? We are going to see later that it's not quite what we get in our results. Who are the taxpayers to the fisc? So the question here is, once we account for all the taxes and transfers that people are receiving, if you actually are a payer or not benefit from it. How active is the access to government to education and health systems? And finally, how progressive are taxes and public spending? So basically, once we get this done, we could ask several important policy questions about how elimination, for example, of VAT, value-added taxes affect inequality, poverty, who benefits from elimination of user fees, education, health, and so on and so forth. So it's a basic, simple question that we are going to answer in our analysis. Say that before taxes and transfers, I have an income, I receive some transfers from the government, I get some indirect subsidies, and I have to buy goods and services, and then I receive, and that's very important for us, some in-kind benefits through health and education. Or pretty much say how much I have to pay for health and education, and that's how we account for the transfers from the government to health and education. So this looks a little bit messy, but this is really what we need. It's a very simple equation to say that the post-fiscal income is going to be just your pre-fiscal income, so pretty much your paycheck. You might think about taxes and transfers, and what is the incidence of taxes by household or by individuals, plus how much you receive on transfers from the government. So this is what is going to guide us through my presentation today, and something, at least after this point, that you really need to remember is this. So what do I have here? We start with market income, you take taxes, and we're going to call the next measure net market income. We add direct transfers, and Latin American conditional cash transfers is the most important one. We call that disposable income. And then if any indirect subsidies minus indirect taxes, we call post-fiscal income. And then we add in-kind benefits, education, health. We call that final income. So what we are going to do is quite simple. We are going to start with market income, and for each change on your income, we are going to calculate the change in the quality poverty. So we're going to start with net market income, we get to final income in each stage. We are going to adjust and calculate again the measure for inequality, just the Gini index, and the measure of poverty is the usual ones from the World Bank. 125 PPP, ultra poverty, $250 PPP, extreme poverty, and $4 PPP, moderate poverty. So this is basically what we did for all these countries. And two definitions that are important. I know this is a little bit, maybe too much, but it's really important to understand the results. We call progressive for taxes if the proportion paid rises with income. So we all face that in most countries. Direct taxes are progressive. High is your income, the more you pay for it. Is regressive in proportion paid declines of income. We are going to find regressive taxes, especially for consumption goods. And it's neutral, there is coincides with distribution of market income. Likewise, for transfers, progressive proportion receive declines of income, and regressive proportion receive increase of income. And its neutral proportion receive coincides with contribution of market income. These definitions are important because you are going to see a diverse results for the countries that we study here. So now, the data that we use, it's all from household surveys. For Argentina, Carola actually used 3 years. It's the same for Mexico. They have actually true time, 2008 to 2010. But Bolivia, Brazil, Peru, and Uruguay is 2009. I am the alpha for Brazil, and this is the latest survey that we can use. This is a household survey, very well detailed. In the case of the Brazilian survey, you have data about income, taxes, contribution to Social Security, who is receiving cash transfers. So we have pretty much everything we need for our analysis on this household survey. If you don't find it, then we simulate. You might do some imputation or use secondary sources. But what we did over the years was try to get less information for other sources as possible. And one contribution of this study is to really to make transparent what we're doing along the way. So most people think, and I did think that a few years ago, that like the World Bank or the IMF, from time to time they released these studies about inequality in Latin America or other regions of the world. They will have something even close to this, and to our surprise, they do not. That's why recently the World Bank is actually going to use our methodology officially to compare inequality and poverty across countries. Everything about taxes is from the code in the country, so I can't give you more details if you are interested about the Brazil case, because it's very depressing how we do taxation in Brazil. But the part of this slide that's important is monetizing kite transfer. So what's monetizing kite transfers is that the government spends, say, 10% of GDP on health, and we have through other sources as government survey how much of each service is going to each individual, or at least this side of income, and then we can recover how much on average each of these sides is receiving. And then we ask the question, how much you have to pay for it, and that's how much you're getting from the government. It's not the most accurate way of doing health, but it is the best we can do at this point. In the case of Brazil, we do get a very good approximation to the actual data on how much the government spent on health in 2009. So this is part of what we call the Commitment to Effort project. It's a comprehensive standard fiscal incidence of fiscal systems around the world now. It's no longer just Latin American. We use income per capita as a welfare indicator. We're still economists. The allocates very few transparency and data used for each category, tax shift assumptions, mainly average incidence, that's what's available, and incidence at the national level, rural and urban area. I can maybe discuss that. We have a separate group of countries that can do rural and urban. And by race and ethnicity, this is the new project, the one that we got recently support for the Inter-American Development Bank. So this is what's ahead. So basically what we're going to do is to open that fiscal policy in each country and ask how much on taxes and transfers is affecting income inequality and poverty. So our contribution, in addition to create a comparable methodology, is to make sure that everyone understands what we did, how we did it, and what are the limitations. We disaggregate change as much as possible, and we develop a new indicator. That's a second contribution for this work, and particularly the rate of impoverishment. What does that mean? Through the fiscal system, what we found, this is one of the great things of research, we discovered that after the analysis, that what we discover is that if you look at each category by decile, once we account for our fiscal policy intervention, some people were shifted into the groups. Something that you will say, well, because you're looking at the average, it's like changing people in the line. Some people are moving up, some people are moving down. And what is creating that movement that was a surprise for most people is just indirect taxes, and you can show that. That's one of the thunders for later, when we show the results for poverty, especially Brazil and Bolivia, that the effect of indirect taxes is going to offset almost completely the cash transfer programs. So we've been trying to show this to the Brazilian government for the last 4 years, and they're still ignoring us for obvious reasons. And finally, Laura and Sean developing what they are calling the fiscal mobility matrix. That is a way of calculating the proportion of people that make worse off or better off with fiscal intervention. So we have then the contribution being to have a comparable methodology to calculate the effects of fiscal incidence on inequality and poverty, and then some measures of empowerment in the region in this particular case. So what are the main results? Well, we have At this point, Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Mexico, Paraguay, Peru, and Uruguay. And progress, Ecuador, El Salvador, DR, and Honduras, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. We have 17 countries already. So the main results, the first one is expected, direct taxes, progressive. So, but very little effect on inequality. And the reason is because we do not pay much direct taxes in Latin America. Bolivia don't pay at all. There are no income taxes in Bolivia. In Brazil, even though we have a 35% taxation over GDP, only about 10% of the labor force actually pay income taxes. So the base here is very small. You might think from a policy perspective that there is room here to increase taxes. Don't mention or don't quote me on this one. But direct taxes are expected progressive but very little impact on equality. Conditional cash transfers are progressive in absolute terms and very well targeted in practically all countries. And the surprise one here is Bolivia. They don't do a very good job targeting through one Citro Pinto the main conditional cash transfer program in Bolivia. Indirect taxes are regressive. And redistribution is larger through in-kind benefits. So the first result, it's on the paper, is this. So let's just work together on the Gini index. So you all know what it is, closer to 1, it's really bad, closer to 0, we all getting the same income. So we are the champions, Brazil. So everything in Brazil is what, right? We used to be the best in soccer, and today I cannot even discuss that with my fellow Argentinians. The topic I took off the agenda. So what is happening with Brazil? Well, we do accomplish a lot, but the transition here from disposable income through post-fiscal income, it doesn't see a big change on the Gini index in Brazil and most countries. So again, this is after you account for direct taxes. We add transfers, so there is a huge improvement. And then we take indirect taxes. So you see the effect of indirect taxes even for inequality, and poverty is going to be worse. Maybe that doesn't change that much, so we stop that decline. And then when we add in-kind benefits, so you get final income, it'll have a huge effect on inequality. So we can actually do that for most countries that we have in our data set here. When we include in-kind benefits, we have a substantial decrease on inequality. So we can say then that redistribution through health and education creates a larger effect on inequality than cash transfer programs. Because you see cash transfer programs, they do play an important role, but the biggest change is when we add in-kind benefits. And that is true for every country here. Just one footnote here about Argentina. The Argentina numbers are not directly comparable because they don't have taxes. So in the analysis, but we do see a decline through cash transfer programs, as we see in other countries. But they are expected. Diversity. So government side, primary spending 41% in Brazil compared to just 19% in Peru. The extent of the redistribution, largest in Argentina, 25% decline in inequality compared to 7% in Peru. Brazil is around 20, and Uruguay is the second best on the distribution. Net failures to the fix. This is really sad and bad news. What happens, it starts at a relatively low D side. In some countries, the second D side. What does that mean is that how much you're receiving is offset on how much you have to pay. So you are a net payer to the fix. And tertiary education is progressive in relative terms. It's particularly important in Brazil and Uruguay. Uruguay does a very good job on inequality and poverty, but tertiary education is really benefiting the non-poor. And the contributory pensions are progressive in relative terms or regressive depending on the country. So for the size of government, as you can see here, there is a diversity in Latin America. And that diversity is Brazil and Argentina. They spend a lot. Uruguay in the middle here, 28%, the private is spending 13% on social spending. But how much Uruguay gets accomplished is a lot more than Argentina and Brazil. So we have some other measures. How effective are these transfers and the fiscal system? So Uruguay actually does a better job than Brazil and Argentina. So these two countries here, they spend like OECD countries. And they get a lot less. So there is something that we can talk about the Brazil and Argentina case. And we think Peru, they spend very little, but they accomplish a lot, spending so little. So you might think that the diversity here is that we do not have just one prototype for Latin American. We have the two, as my fellow Brazilian, the World Bank, Chico Ferreira, found the two outcomes, Brazil and Argentina, very heavy and they move very slowly and they don't go very far, despite spending a lot on social spending. The cash transfer program reduce poverty, and they are well targeted in most countries. Reduce poverty by more than 60% in Uruguay and Argentina, and just 7% in Peru. Then for poverty, and this is one result that, in my case, looking at Brazil, really bothers me. This is the head count, so the poverty rates before and after cash transfers. So you see that there is a reduction in poverty. Except here for Peru, very little. We spend very little as well, so it's expected. So we see that there is the trend in the right direction. But then once you receive your Bolsa Familia or Ancito Pito Progreso, you are going to go to the market. And what we have here, and this is really the slides that particularly shocking, because you see a reverse of fortune here. What does that mean when you move from disposable income? Disposable income then minus indirect taxes. So what's happening with poverty is getting worse. So you might think that the government here is giving a cash transfer on one hand and taking even more, or moving people down. For this is extreme poverty, it's $2.5 PPP a day. The three measures of poverty, the official ones, the only one that's at least some good news for ultra poverty, 125, we don't see this trend. But for $4 PPP, we are going to see even a more shocking change on poverty. And this is, again, Brazil, Bolivia, and Mexico. So what is that we are avoiding? The discussion on the direct taxation in Brazil is poverty increased by a lot when we move from disposable to post-fiscal income. And this is something you might think would be easy to deal with in terms of why is Brazil having such big change on poverty once we account for direct taxes. And the reason is that we are just one of the few countries that have still very high taxation on basic consumption goods, like the canasta básica or the cesta básica or the basic pasta. And recently the Brazilian government tried to decrease some of those taxes, but the most important tax, indirect tax in Brazil, is the state tax. And that did not change. So the effect that we could do it was very small when the government announced the change or the elimination of some of federal taxes or on consumption goods. And incidence of post-fiscal income by this side, I'm going to highlight for you. What does that mean when you cross? When you cross, you become a net payer. So for some countries, we have, even on the second least higher, Peru, Uruguay, Brazil is about the third least higher. So the benefits that you're actually getting from the government are more than offset by the amount of taxes that you have to pay. So if you still remember my picture on the size of government spending, especially Brazil and Argentina, for the Brazilian case, despite 16% on social spending, the third side on become net payers to the fisc. And for the political scientists in the room, lots of them here, You might think about the social unrest in Brazil last year, by June, July, when the middle class was in the street demanding better government services. Well, should not be a surprise, given that they are net payers to the fisc big time. Argentina is the most effective country, and I'm going to close that, but I wish Carola was here. But it's gone too far in terms of fiscal sustainability. So it's the only country that actually have an analysis for how sustainable it would be for the government to keep the programs that they currently have. Bolivia is the leftist government that introduced very little, and Brazil direct taxes offset pretty much the transfer benefits and moving people from poverty or moderate poverty to extreme poverty. And the poor whites receive more in cash transfers than the poor black and farmers in Brazil. This is what I'm currently working with. And I'm calling the Great Divide because we see if you are white, if you are poor and white, you are much better, or you're better off than blacks and farmers.
What's the mechanism of this? That's not on the paper. What's the mechanism? So, because Bolsa Familia, I mean, the cash transfers are targeted on income, so how can they discriminate by race?
They don't discriminate by race, but the big programs are not Bolsa Familia, it's DCC and the non-contributory pensions. And those are the ones that the poor whites are receiving compared.
It's age?
It's not just age, it's just access to it. So that's the part we are still working on the explanation exactly why that is in the data that poor whites are better off. Because those programs, they have a larger share than Bolsa Familia. And those benefits are primarily reaching white poor.
But they're based on age, they're not based on race. I mean, how?
Yes, yeah.
So it's just because the white live longer? Or?
No, it's not the white live longer. It's just, for example, one possible explanation is the rural urban bias.
Okay.
So you might think that that is one possibility. Other possibility is that some of the poor white ones, we found that there is a larger proportion of them that initiated on the contributory system and they left. So then they are somehow already registered, and then when they ask for the benefits, they are the ones that get in line, because there's not everyone that's going to get it. There is a limit on the budget. Just like for Bolsa Familia. And Mexico distribution has increased, but still lags behind Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay. And Peru helped play this progressive only relative terms. So finally, Uruguay is the poster child because it gets a lot more done than the other countries. It spends relatively less than Brazil and Argentina. Taxes are neutral. The only thing in Uruguay is success in tertiary education is concentrated on the non-poor. And of course, they do have health insurance, something that we don't have in other countries, or at least most countries are not have it. For the government, see if you are poor. And finally, just to summarize everything, direct tax and cash transfers reduce inequality by non-trivial amounts up to 25%. Direct taxes are progressive, but the impact is very small because we don't pay direct taxes. Cash transfer programs are quite progressive. Bolivia, Brazil, direct taxes more than offset poverty reduction. The cash transfers and in-kind benefits is by large the most important effect on inequality across countries. And what we are doing lately, we are updating some of the household surveys, so we do not have control over this. And the case of Brazil was supposed to be released early this year, and as you might know, we did have elections recently, and for some reason it was postponed for next year. Urban and rural inequality and poverty, it's already pretty much finished. Gender and racial inequality, with the Direct Development Bank, and recently we became global with the Gates Foundation and the World Bank. So I'd like to invite you to take a look on the webpage. It's commitmenttorecord.org. So we started here 5 years ago, and now we have, through the Gates Foundation in Africa and the World Bank and some European countries, the commitment to record methodology has been embraced officially by the World Bank. It's now part of the database if you search data on equality. And it's very exciting that, again, we started this before it became unfortunately fashionable to talk about inequality around the world. Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation. This is a great opportunity. This work is really fantastic. I mean, I've been following the project, both projects for a few years now, and it was a fantastic opportunity to read two papers. And both papers are not only good, but they really come from work that's based on regional networks, on people who really work across many countries in the region, and who's really trying to produce knowledge that understands the regional issues that are important in the region, but that also at the same time has comparative lessons. So I think it's a great choice. The two papers, I think, present in a way diverse perspectives of the same story as what expected. I think Maristela emphasized the homogeneity of the region regarding the policies, development policies, in particular associated with the commodity boom, and the paper of the kind of Lustig et al. And that Claudine presented really emphasized the social policies that are paid with the resources of the commodity boom. And so it's interesting to have the two sides of the story. I have two types of comments. I have two general comments about the two papers, and then I have specific comments about each of them. So I will start with the general comments. And one that's quite surprising for me is that, in a sense, both of the papers did not look at something that's the only thing that the US government looks in Latin America, which are drugs and migrations. If you want to say Latin America and the US, the only two things that people care about are drugs and migrations, totally absent in these two papers. And why do I mention it? I thought it was interesting in the sense that drug production, when I start thinking about Maristela's paper, I thought it's a typical commodity that he's talking about. It's the agricultural commodity. In fact, in many countries, like in Paraguay, I'm studying soybean now, and there is a fight for land between marijuana and soybean and production. It's true, this is a commodity as opposed to the other ones that Maristela looks at, because it's illegal, does not pay taxes to the central government, so it doesn't sustain the social policies. But what's important about drugs, I think, is not so much the production. I mean, I'm not going to say it's not important, but the distribution and the impact of the distribution in countries that have not been talked so much in these two papers, which are basically Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean, because the drugs come to the United States, mainly. This is still the main market. And one of the things that really is important about the impacts of drugs in the political economy of the region and the impact they have on redistribution is the terrible effect it has on state capacity. What we're seeing is the destruction of many states in Central America and even the Mexican case. And I think state capacity is a crucial variable for both of your analysis, both for understanding the commodity consensus and development, and for understanding social policy. And so in that sense is that I thought it was important to bring the issue of drugs, and in particular to understand what's going on in the northern part of Latin America, so north of the Panama Canal, I would say. Migration is also crucial for the very same reason, a very important part of the story of Central America and Mexico that continue to send labor into the United States. And these people continue to send remittances back home. So that's, again, part of the income that, is crucial for any incident on the impact of inequality. That's not social policy. That's not something the government does, except by sending people out, I guess. And I think it's important to think what is the effect, if we really want to see what's the net effect of remittances for the countries. For some of these countries, it's really a big chunk of income. But also, more importantly, I think it really tells us that the northern part of Latin America is still very much tied to the United States. Not just by drugs and labor, also by trade ties, CAFTA, NAFTA. I mean, this is the main market. And so this makes us think a little bit about the idea of a Beijing consensus that Maristela talked about, that might be more true for the southern part of the region than for the northern part of the region, where China has much less to offer than it does to the southern part of the region. So that's one general comment. The second general comment has to do with the sustainability of this commodity boom. And I guess in that maybe I'm defending the structuralists that you are criticizing, Maristela. I never thought I would do it, but and we're just seeing now a decline on prices. In the last month, we've seen oil prices come down for many reasons. One, that the US is also into fracking and is joining the commodity boom. But I think, you know, the paper on social policy discuss a little bit the sustainability of Argentina. Argentina is an easy case, you know, there's always a self-inflicted pain on economic policy. But really, for all of these countries that are, even for the other 5 countries, the dependence on commodity prices, for all of these social policies to be sustained, because there's no progressive taxation. There's been no real fiscal reform. It's basically, you know, they're taxing the poor with the value-added taxes, and they're taxing the producers in different ways, and they're different producers through the commodity taxes on trade or commodities directly. What's the sustainability of this even modest declining inequality that you show if the commodity prices come down? So that's kind of, and for Maristela, you know, China seems to be moving really unstoppable, and I even get calls from journalists asking me about the Chinese are buying the Waldorf Astoria. What do you think? Nothing, thank you very much. But I mean, it's really a trajectory that we know where it's going to end. I mean, it looks like, you know, this is the largest economy in the world, but there might be hiccups in the trajectory. There might be not such a straight line. And what would be the implications for the story of development that you told us, you know, of a change in commodity prices? So those are my 2 general comments. So I'm going to move now to Maristela first, and then to the economists, because I'm a political scientist. I'm going to start in the more known terrain. Maristela's piece is very thought-provoking, it's very ambitious, very innovative. I mean, I love Maristela's work from ever. And I think it really makes us think about developmental policies and ideas in Latin America. And I really like that she emphasized the winners and losers. That's what I'm into. And that she also emphasized international implications. This was really a very refreshing call of attention for the study of Latin American political economy, and the kind of devolution from the Washington consensus into the commodities consensus really is a very welcome. Now, she's also very concerned with this paradox, I think more paradoxically for her even, that the commodities consensus comes from these left-wing governments that were expected to do something different, that were, you know, expanding boundary rights, alternative to development, and in fact, you know, it's really the broken promises to all the social movements and indigenous movements and so on and so forth that made by these governments. And in fact, the interesting thing is, like, it looks like the 1990s again. You know, in the 1990s, everybody was adopting neoliberal policies, whether you voted left or right. Here, whether you voted left or right, everybody is, you know, doing you know, basically commodity consensus and reprioritization. So, I think this is a story that depicts much better South America than Central America and Mexico. I do see the northern region of Latin America as following a different path, as following a path that's paradoxically in the sense that that's the region that always live of natural resources, and it has moved into manufacture very much from the United States, maquila, industrial production even of more developed nature for the case of Mexico, service economies for Costa Rica and Panama. I think the story is a little bit more nuanced, and in particular, there's also variation between each of these 2 sub-regions, but I see an interesting contrast across the 2 sub-regions, where the story that you tell, Maristela, is much more the story of the South than is the story of Central America, the Caribbean, and Mexico. And the second thing, you know, really when I was reading your piece, I was remember Cardoso and Faleto and development theory, you know, the dependency theory. And what's interesting is in this narrative, and you only had the chance to present the paper, you really couldn't go in the things that they talk about. Does the type of production matter? Does the degree of capital intensity matter? You put all of the commodity together, agricultural, mining, oil, there's very different production patterns, origin of capital, sometimes it's from the region, sometimes it's foreigner, sometimes these are state-owned companies, sometimes they're private companies. To what extent do these patterns matter in terms of the commodity consensus, or don't they matter at all? And related, as you said, there is a competition for these resources, such as land or water, that can be used for different, like water is very important for mining, for open pit mining, but it's also important for fracking, and it's also important for agriculture. So to what extent this conflict, even among those producers that are interested in exploiting commodities for international markets, can open opportunities to change outcomes, either in forms of resistance or in forms of policies. Does it matter if you have more than one commodity at the same time, rather than an enclave, to use the old dependency terminology? And finally, and I think we had this conversation in a prior occasion, but this relates to the paper on social policy and inequality, to what extent, and in particular in the cases of progressive governments, are we seeing here a dynamics of redistribution, in particular in the second stage, when you talk about conflict, that pit the poor against the poor? The poor, I guess the urban poor that benefit with our rural, whether with the cash transfer program, with the poor in the regions where the commodities are exploited that suffer the environmental consequences of those exploitations. So to what extent is really are the Mapuche that oppose the fracking, or the Quom that oppose the soybean expansion, are suffering for the a resource transfer that benefits the poor in the urban areas of Argentina, for instance. Or in Bolivia, you discuss the Tipnis, but there are other indigenous groups that still support redistribution and the boom that created by commodities moved to the eastern part of the country. So both through market and through policy, they support this, and it seems that democracy always tends to give the benefit to the majority. Evo Morales was re-elected with an overwhelming majority. Correa was also re-elected. So the majorities tend to say that they are right, but beyond that, given that the minority suffer in this particular case, how do they affect our own conceptualization in terms of what should be a democratic theory of development, which is what you are looking for? So on the paper on social policy, this is really a fantastic study, lots of detail, very summary. This is also part of a huge project that has been very successful, has produced a strong impact in the study of Latin American political economy, and really emphasize the careful empirical analysis of all these components. I think what the paper brings that's very important is the idea of diversity, the different trajectories of all these countries, what they do. They all take the money from the commodities, they all adopt cash transfer programs, and yet the outcomes are, and they all have value-added tax instead of a decent progressive taxation system, but there's still quite a lot of variation. So I certainly cannot comment on the measures because I'm not an economist, so I'm just going to make some political scientist suggestions to complement or to start a conversation here. And the nature of redistribution is crucial here. You really talk about taxation, and I think that's the kind of the big point of the paper, that taxation does not have the effect that we expect in the advanced industrial countries, where taxation is supposed to take from the rich to give those transferred to a poor. Here taxation takes from the poor. But there's two different ways in which taxation also is important. One is related to state capacity, and that is related to the informal sector. So in relation to the state capacity, I think it's interesting that the countries that do the best in your study are those that, if you get any measure of state capacity, have more state capacity. So in a sense, it seems that there is some legacy coming from whatever, the post-war era, but it's not surprising that Uruguay, Argentina, and Brazil come up as, you know, having the strongest state capacity. They already have the strongest health and education system, and most of your effect comes from the in-kind transfers, and therefore they have the best performance. So, and you tell Bolivia is terrible, they don't do anything, but we know Bolivia has not really a working state. So even if they wanted to target the Juanito Pinto, they claim they don't want to target, but even if they want, would they be able to target it? Would they be able to enforce any targeting of the system? They don't. And so I guess they just made it into an ideology, what really is an issue of capacity. Both Bolivia and Peru have the weakest state capacity of the set. And so what can weak states do? They can not enforce. I guess that's the cheapest way they can transfer to the poor. So why not, instead of transferring cash, or maybe in addition to transferring cash transfers, they just, and you're telling me they're right, they just don't charge taxes. They don't enforce taxation. So it's a huge, and by now there are papers talking about the non-enforcement of regulation as a social policy to benefit the poor. One that's quite suboptimal, but one that many people can argue didn't change. If you vote the left, they stop enforcement. You vote the right, they start enforcement again. It's a very strong effect. So to what extent can you consider non-enforcement in your, I mean, I don't know how you measure it, so I'm putting into it, but in your analysis as an alternative that can be monetized as a transfer to the poor? And what would be the effect? So that's my question. And in particular for the cases of Bolivia and Peru, that seems like what you can do given your state capacity. The other question I had is on the timing of the program and on the design of the program. You assume here that all of them are more or less the same and were started at the same time. But like Progresa is the oldest of all, and the Peruvian one is very, very recent. So is there any learning? Does it matter? You know, do the last ones are better than the early ones? You talk about the effect of size, of coverage, of targeting. Does it matter how it's done? I mean, targeting, for instance, is done very differently. Some countries target, some countries don't target, and some countries do something in the middle. They catch you if you don't send your kids to school. They don't take the money out like Progresa does, but instead they try to teach you to send your kids to school. So there's quite a lot of variation there. Does it matter? Or is just a question that has no different effect? And then on the political underpinnings of reform, I mean, it's interesting that you are telling us, and this goes back to Maristela's paper, that Peru and Mexico are those that do the less, and also those where there's less reduction in poverty and inequality, and these, you know, are the only two non-left governments in your sample. So does it really matter, you know, who is in government for the policy, and then do the policies, that was my prior question, do the policy design affect the outcomes? And here is interesting because cash transfers are incredibly popular. Taxes are not popular, but the value-added tax, the reason why it was put is because people don't really figure out very well how it's working. You know, it's different to pay your taxes in your income than to pay through the value-added taxes. And we see very different electoral returns. I mean, these are usually popular policies, but the Uruguays that your poster child here are having a much harder time to call to power than the Bolivians, which were a terrible case in your story. So either the voters don't care or something else is going on. And so that was a question about what are the political logic of this redistribution, what that explains this kind of different discontent. You say it's taxation in Brazil, I can buy your Brazilian story, but still Uruguay is surprising. And one of the things that I thought might be related is that the strongest effect that you show was in-kind transfers, which is basically health and education. And this is important because in many studies of political science, the health and education is used as an indicator of state capacity. So it's both a policy and an indicator. And you explained that you monetize based on how much the government spends per, more or less. But although you mentioned it in the conclusion, there's really no different price for quality. And the two countries, I don't know data on education, on health, but on education, the PISA exams for Argentina and Uruguay show both the worst declines. I mean, these are the countries that started at the top of the distribution for the region, not in the world, and have moved towards the bottom, and show the largest difference between people in the top deciles and the bottom deciles on income results, on test results. So it's not just that the whole thing declined, but inequality in education increased dramatically in both Uruguay and Argentina, which might explain that the Uruguayans are not so happy. So what is the implication of quality in terms of monetization and in terms of this analysis that you presented, and how would you go about it? I guess this is kind of the end of my comments. Again, two great papers and a fantastic discussion to have.
Okay, so why don't we first give a chance to the presenters to answer Vicky's comments, and we can get to the front. What you
You can go to the front.
He's attacking. Come on.
You have
I can go down. You want to make over?
So Maristela, did she hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. You did this?
Yes, sir.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can see you in the biggest screen too.
Maristela, would you like to answer to Vicky's comments? Okay.
Yes. Hello. I'm here. I'm here, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
But I cannot answer in English, that is the way. It's possible to answer in Spanish?
Yes. Vicky's my answer.
Thank you for comments, Vicky. The third question is a question about the drug, the role of the drug in Latin America. Isn't it?
Sorry, what did you say? A role of the
Vicky.
drugs? The first question, yeah, drugs and immigration, yeah.
Okay, so drugs and immigration.
Drug and immigration.
Yeah.
Immigration, yes. And lo voy a decir en castellano.
Sí, dale.
Me pareció muy interesante esa observación, primero, digamos, subrayando el hecho de que nuestras presentaciones mostraban las dos caras de la moneda, pero que habían dejado de lado los temas.
Para un poquito que para traducir.
Okay.
She said it was interesting that, the two presentations presented two different faces of the same coin. Puede continuar traduciendo.
Sí, ok. Con respecto al tema sobre todo del rol de la droga en América Latina, hay un punto de comparación con el extractivismo.
With regards to the drug in Latin America, she agrees that there is a comparison, a point that's similar to the extractivism.
Yo retomo sobre todo los trabajos de Rita Segato, antropóloga argentina-brasileña.
There is the work of Rita Segato, which is an anthropologist that's half Argentinian, half Brazilian,
que subraya sobre todo el carácter de renta extraordinaria.
that suggests that drugs also generate rents.
Ya en 1994, la conferencia de la ONU sobre el clima global organizado estimaba que solo el narcotráfico reunía cifras anuales mayores por 10 transacciones globales de petróleo.
So she calculates that the rents derived from narco traffic are higher, the volume of money that it moves is even higher than for oil.
Y por otro lado está la cuestión del foco y el control territorial.
No, ahora nos perdimos, me perdí.
Just to make, para hacer esto más fácil para Vicky, voy a seguir traduciendo eso, ¿ok? Estela. So, on the other hand, there is the issue of territorial control as well.
Claro, el foco y control territorial porque el narcotráfico también supone control territorial de los barrios a través del manejo de la violencia y una reconfiguración de las subjetividades populares.
So narcotraffic also entails the territorial control of neighborhoods through violence and I forgot the last part. Sorry, I missed the last part.
Y la reconfiguración de las subjetividades populares.
Okay, and the reconfiguration of popular identities. Sorry about that.
No, simplemente para subrayarlo, porque hay muy poco trabajo en América Latina sobre esta temática que es tan importante hoy en día.
There is very little work done in Latin America about this thematic of drugs, which is so important nowadays.
En esta doble clave que he señalado.
In that way of territorial control and changing local identities.
Y la renta extraordinaria, sobre todo, también.
And also the issue of the extraordinary rents that it generates.
Entonces, me parece que por esa misma razón me parece muy interesante como comentario para pensar la reconfiguración de los países latinoamericanos.
So I think this was a great comment to really think about the reconfiguration of Latin American countries nowadays.
Sobre los comentarios puntuales a mi presentación, que si no me equivoco son 3.
So about the more specific comments about her presentation, we see considers to be 3 main ones.
El primero, si no me equivoco, Vicky subrayaba que el tomar los consensos y la cuestión de las promesas rotas tenía más que ver con la historia de Sudamérica que con México y Centroamérica, ¿es así?
Sí. So the first criticism or the first comment was that the issue of the commodities consensus and the broken promises of developmentalism had to do more with the story of the Southern corn than Central America, Mexico, and the Caribbean. Yes, Southern corn.
Southern corn is only Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay.
Okay, South America.
Eso es básicamente el comentario que tenía Vicky.
Sí, que en la parte de Centroamérica y México y el Caribe hay una lógica
Sí,
diferente.
efectivamente, eso es claramente así. Los gobiernos progresistas caracterizan sobre todo a Sudamérica, pero el consenso de los commodities es algo que abraza todo el continente.
No, en realidad lo que yo te dije es eso, que Centroamérica y el Caribe hay más movimiento hacia la manufactura y alejándose más de los recursos naturales.
Por ejemplo, hay grandes problemas, hay grandes conflictos ambientales en Centroamérica relativos sobre todo a la vida femenina y la ocupación del territorio, mientras que en México están todos estos problemas presentes a lo que muy probablemente se agregue en poco tiempo el tema del fracking.
So what she's saying is that even in Central America there are environmental conflicts related to mining, and even in Mexico I think in this last part.
That there will be fracking conflicts.
Yeah, that there will be fracking conflicts as well. Okay. María Estela, ¿quieres que nos movamos un poquitito más rápido sobre los otros 2 comentarios como para dar también espacio a la discusión?
Sí, claro. El segundo comentario que quería hacer es que, a ver, cuando uno habla de capitalismo, no es que esté considerando que todos los modelos de desarrollo tienen las mismas características. Hay, por ejemplo, muchas diferencias entre lo que puede ser el modelo de agrobusiness respecto del modelo de megaminería.
Sorry, when she talks about extractivism, she's not implying that this is all the same. She recognizes that there are different differences by sector of economy, so it's not the same agribusiness than mega mining.
Pero hay patrones comunes que tienen que ver con la gran escala, la orientación a la exportación y la tendencia a la monoproducción o el monocultivo.
So, but there are common factors such as the large scale of these projects, the fact that they are oriented towards exportation and mono production.
Y la tercera cuestión, si entendí bien, sobre la cuestión de la redistribución, en realidad todo eso depende, o mejor dicho, en primer lugar hay que reconocer que las dinámicas son recursivas. Las políticas sociales y las políticas de redistribución pueden llegar inclusive a aquellos sectores que son afectados por estos proyectos.
So what she's saying about the third part of the third comment, which has to do with redistribution, is that the social policies and the redistributive policies could actually reach to those that are affected by these mega projects.
Pero en general lo que vemos son algunos casos paradójicos.
But in general, what we see are just some few paradoxical cases or exemplary cases.
Uno de ellos es, por ejemplo, en Argentina, el movimiento campesino indígena que apoya al gobierno de Cristina Kirchner, que acepta planes sociales, pero que se sigue movilizándose contra el modelo de agronegocio.
Okay, so one example, for example, is the peasant and indigenous movement in Argentina, which supports the government of President Cristina Kirchner. They receive whatever policies they get from the government or distribution they get from the government, but nonetheless, they still are against the agribusiness.
Esto sucede en el norte del país.
This is happening in the north of Argentina.
Pero en la zona, la frontera de expansión de la minería y el petróleo es mucho menos común ver que se desarrollen políticas sociales o de redistribución.
But in the areas of expansion of mining and petroleum, which is different regions in the country, more towards the west and the south, we see less policies of social redistribution in those areas.
Hasta ahí, luego.
Okay, muchas gracias, Maristela. Okay. Galviniti, so that like everyone is here and here, yeah.
Thanks, Vic, for the comments. I probably have 3 other papers here. At least. First, the question of sustainability of social policies. It is something that we are planning on working on. And the reason why I think that the commodity boom might not be able to sustain the policies in the region, but as we already, at least I think we agree on this one, that to talk about the region as just one direction doesn't seem right. For example, in Brazil again, since the early 2000s, the tax rate or the tax revenue has been increased from 18 to 35%. Recently, the discussion in Mexico is similar, to increase the tax base. So you might think that even for some of the countries like Brazil and Mexico, you might have room still to sustain this policy for a while, despite that's the case of Brazil now. The last 3 or 4 years, growth has been close to zero, and we still sustain these policies because we have a very large tax revenue. For the other countries, it's quite, the point is direct taxation, it's harder to implement than indirect taxation through VATs, and Peru, Bolivia, they have avoid that confrontation that we already faced in Brazil in the 2000s, and seems now there's no way back. As we economists like to say, the budget that the government makes is just a count to know how much they already spent. So, and the taxation it's similar in that case, and for Brazil and Argentina and Mexico now, I think they are going to go through the same path as Brazil, increasing taxes. On the effect, how effective or targeting the conditional cash transfers, we do have a measure of how effective they are in terms of spending. So for Peru, even though they spend very little, we consider they are very effective in the sense that how little they spend and how much they get done compared to Brazil. So,
But is that associated to design characteristics, so it's just that, you know, there's difference in design, they don't see. So you tell me Peru does better than Brazil, but you don't tell me why.
no, I don't have the why there, maybe because it's reaching a large population in rural areas, so that's the case of Peru. And the poverty, it might be, I don't have an answer for that. For Bolivia, we do know. It's because they are not targeting anyone, they made it universal. So it's just those that actually can have access to it and the urban areas that we get the benefit from those people. Policy design matter. I think it matters, but in our study, the selection of the years, and that's part of some of these questions can be answered through time. That's why Carola was able to talk about sustainability for Argentina. John Scott with Mexico, 2008, 2010. That's why Mexico is moving to a tax reform, likely. It's going to be a messy one, and the oil tax that's going to be transferred now in terms of direct taxes. So, and the results on political redistribution and elections, well, we do not see a big correlation even in Brazil. Maybe the last one, 2 weeks ago, that we have, it seems, on the region where they have more cash transfers, the re-elected president got 70% of the votes, something that's unheard of. And finally, I think on the question in health inequality, that's an issue that we'll be trying to deal with. For education, there is an additional one. For Brazil and Uruguay, is because the quality is very low for secondary education. So the rich drop out, so they elect not to participate. So the results will be heavily affected. The quality is get back that Uruguay is facing that, the Brazilians are facing that. And for health, my answer on health is what we actually have for health, it's a demand for health. We do not have truly the number that it's closer for education, which is about how much each individual, each household is receiving as a direct benefit from the government spending. For health, what we actually have in most countries is just the demand for it. It doesn't characterize precisely what is each individual is entitled to. In the case of Brazil, it's a constitutional right. Even though the basic health seems to be covered, the more complex treatment is actually being used by the middle class and the rich, either through the access to the capital cities. So the issue on quality for both education and health, we are still working on to at least for health. That's what we can do. For education, the effect will be larger, meaning that inequality is not going to be as decreasing as much in the studies if the quality was improved. So you expect that. I think I at least touched. Maybe I forgot something. If you want to remind me, yeah.
Thank you, Vinny. Now we'd like to open the floor for questions, comments. I actually have, since one thing my prerogative being one with microphone, so I think I have more questions. The first one is for Maristela, and you know, the Washington consensus sort of was a reaction to import substitution, industrialization, and I thought that one of the things that they really accomplished was to move the discussion of development away from the internal market and towards export orientation. And you remember that whole thing about the comparison with the Asian model and exports and so forth. So I was wondering to what extent this it's really the export orientation, the big change, or it's the reconsideration of the internal market as a force for development. It seems that, I would read your paper that the issue of the internal market, redistribution, consumption, internal consumption, in my experience, at least in Argentina, people keep complaining about import restrictions and that they cannot buy the tires for their Japanese cars, and so I wonder what the role of import controls in development and in defining this model, what kind of place do you give to that in your analysis? And for Claudine, I was wondering about the data, and I'm going to pick up on something that Vicky mentioned about the informal sector. And so the data is household surveys. So how well do you have rural areas represented? You have rural households in your sample, and I think there's variation about these household surveys, whether urban areas or rural areas, and the informal sector. I'm puzzled by the result for Bolivia, to be honest. It's one of the most popular governments, just got elected, tremendous support, and the fact that it's the one that shows no change, it's sort of puzzling. And I was wondering if it has to do, one of the role of the state capacity has to do with whether the employment is formal or informal, and your measure is wages. And what does that mean for the informal sector in terms of wages? And do you can have transfers that reach the informal sector that it doesn't show up on wages? Or I don't know, maybe you can clarify that.
Pregúntate a Maristela si está traducido.
Maristela, ¿vas a hablar en español?
La pregunta.
¿La pregunta te la traduzco? ¿Entendiste? No, la pregunta es el sector interno, el mercado interno, que a mí en cierta forma parecería que la cuestión de exportaciones es más una continuación del Washington Consensus, en donde el modelo nuevo no es igual que el Import Substitution Industrialization, porque antes era anti-exportador. Ahora es exportador, pero también prestando atención al mercado interno. Toda la cuestión de regulación de las importaciones, controles de las importaciones, negociación con Brasil y demás. ¿Qué lugar tiene el mercado interno en este nuevo modelo que vos describís?
No, muy bien. Yo creo que antes que nada hay que decir que en realidad la base de legitimidad de estos gobiernos es también el modelo de consumo, ¿no? ¿Se entiende ahí?
So what she's saying is that the base of legitimacy of these governments is consultation, not consumption. Oh, consumption, sorry. I'm thinking of my notes. It's consumption.
Yo creo que de todas maneras ha habido un gran cambio entre el Washington Consensus y el Commodities Consensus, no solo por la gran escala de la cantidad de proyectos orientados hacia la exportación, sino porque efectivamente ha habido una orientación de las políticas gubernamentales a ampliar el mercado interno.
So she's saying that there has been a big change in the pattern from the Washington Consensus to the Commodities Consensus, not only because of the bigger scale of the project for exportation, but also because of the role of the internal markets, which is what the question of the media was about. The policy promoting.
Durante los primeros años del Commodities Consensus, inclusive, si miramos el caso de la Argentina, había muy poca visibilidad no solo de los conflictos ligados a la cuestión, por ejemplo, de la soja, sino más bien lo que se subrayaba era el dinamismo del mercado interno y la recuperación de una cierta base industrial perdida en la Argentina.
So what she's saying is that in the first years of the commodity consensus, which she dates back to 2003, there was very little visibility of conflicts surrounding the production of soy, for example, and instead the government was highlighting the recuperation of internal consumption and the expansion of internal markets.
Inclusive, para algunos todavía no es visible, se discute todavía la cuestión de la revitalización de las economías.
That even is under discussion whether these economies have been re-primarized, going back to the production of primary products, yes.
Cuando los datos de la CEPAL lo muestran con claridad y sobre todo el ingreso de China demandando productos primarios que ha generado un fuerte efecto de reprimarización. Pero sin duda,
so she doesn't doubt there has been reprimariization. On the one hand, the data from the ECLAC shows this, as well as the type of investments that China is making, which move the local economies in the direction of reprimariization. But no doubt,
sin duda, el eje de legitimación de los gobiernos ha sido dinamizar el mercado interno y hacer una cierta redistribución por la base de consumo.
but without any doubt, the way of these governments to legitimize themselves is to dynamize, to infuse with energy, and stimulate the internal markets. Domestic consumption. Yeah, domestic consumption.
Sobre todo en los sectores urbanos, lo cual plantea como uno de los grandes problemas la desconexión o la distancia entre las problemáticas en pequeñas y medianas ciudades afectadas por proyectos extractivos y las grandes ciudades ancladas en un fuerte modelo de consumo.
Okay, particularly these policies of dynamism of internal markets and promotion of internal consumption has been focused on urban areas, large urban areas, which meant that small and medium-sized cities are now farther apart from the large urban areas that are where the governments are focusing.
No, but she said that the smaller towns that suffer the consequences of the expansion of commodities like mining gets more separated from those that enjoy the consumption in the large urban areas that are very distant geographically.
Okay.
Gracias. Gracias.
So there are two sides of the analysis. One is on the spending and one is on the taxation. So how does the informal sector account for? So on the survey, the data on wage is self-reported. So if it's formal or informal, we don't know. So that has to play a role, because as long as the survey is representing wealth, it should be okay. On the tax side, that is a problem. So for the countries that relies more on indirect taxes, especially, for example, for Peru and Bolivia, so the assumption made by Miguel in Peru was for rural areas where they don't have official markets, they are not paying direct taxes, and they are not.
But even the poor urban don't pay taxes because they don't go through normal markets. I mean, a lot of it works in the informal market. The informal market is much stronger for the lower strata of the population.
For Peru, for Mexico, and for Bolivia, our teams accounted for what they believe was the size of the informal market in terms of how much people are avoiding taxation. In the case of Brazil, that's also an important part. So our secondary source used this 10 years study to recover how much people are avoiding taxation. It's very little because cascade effect of the Brazilian tax system is substantial that even in informal markets, because let's say it's agriculture, you have to pay for fuel and that is heavily taxed and so on and so forth. We do know that they are paying less than people in urban areas, but they still pay some. So our assumption then, in the case of Brazil, was that some of the evasion was accounted on that study. It's about 10–15%. But at the end of the day, even with the evasion from indirect taxes, how much the foreign was paying was substantial. In the case of Brazil. In the case of Peru and Bolivia, they are just assumed that they didn't pay it all. So it's accounted for in that part for those countries. In terms of the state capacity, back to Rick's question, for Peru, they get little done, but they spend very little. So in Brazil, we spend a lot, we don't get as much in terms of how effective the spending, the public spending is. So we do expect to have some correlation. I think that's what you are expecting to hear, but how much and how strong may be something that we can do if you political scientists. Because that's one important part that we do not deal with in terms of, at this point. I think with the update of the surveys, we'll be able to say more about all these questions that are important in terms of correlation of elections with state capacity, and they're still not there. So we are expecting for the next year or two to get the household surveys. So the years for Brazil, Bolivia, 2009 is because of the latest survey that is available to us. So there's nothing we can do about that. So for the next round, maybe some of these questions or some of the new studies that will show up. I think last year there was some doubt with you to join CQ to maybe get us another specialist state class. I think it's the very important question that you raised today that we cannot say much other than it looks like there is a correlation in some cases, but then you find Peru that is very little capacity, but for the amount that they're spending, for some criteria that we use, they seem to be effective.
Can I ask that question? You have to wrap up over time now. Okay.
So, okay. So, I mean, we're going to be around, so you're going to ask the questions. Okay.
We can talk informally now for the next 20 minutes or so before we have to get out of here.
Okay, I'd like to thank the